Hey, what's up guys? My name is Josh and today we're going to be doing something pretty special. I'm going to be reviewing a friend of mine's system. He's actually been a friend of the show. You may be familiar with a few of his headphones. His name is Israel and he's dropped off a number of headphones for me to review in the past. And today I'm going to be reviewing a small part of his very large collection of audio equipment. Now this system is going to come in at the price point of $6,000, about $3,500 for the headphones and about $2,300 for the amp and the DAC and a couple $100 for the accessories. Now I do want to make a couple disclaimers here. This is sort of what happens when your audio hobby kind of runs away from you a little bit and you don't need to spend $6,000 to get really good sound. You don't need to spend anywhere near that amount. So don't get kind of overwhelmed with this price tag thinking that in order to achieve something really great, you have to spend this much. You definitely don't. Two, I'm just going to be kind of analyzing the performance of this specific system altogether, and I definitely think there are some imbalances, but I want to note here that this amp and DAC are made to drive a collection of headphones, not just this one in particular. So while I think this system is imbalanced, I'm going to recommend some areas where you could save some cost with this particular headphone. Just know that most of the system is part of a larger collection. Okay, so what we have is a Hifiman HE1000 SE. Again, the price tag for this thing is about $3,500. Then you have it on a Grove made stand, which is about $150. And we're gonna be using a peri-opt cable, which is another $50. Then you have a Gustard X26 DAC and a Gustard H20 headphone amplifier. Now these are very versatile, but the DAC is actually pretty good for the price. The amp, not so much, and there's definitely some areas where you could improve and even get the same performance for drastically less cost. Okay, first I think we should start with the HE1000 SE. I reviewed this headphone a while ago. I did a full review of this headphone. This headphone is very technically impressive. It's got some of the best detail retrieval on the market today. It also has a very large planar that is surprisingly easy to drive. And you can drive this off of things like laptops and phones without an issue. You do get a little bit better performance by going to better amplifiers, but to be honest with this thing, because of how it's designed, you don't need a system like that. And this is one of the mismatches here, is you have a system that is designed to push a lot of power through a lot of different headphones, but you have a headphone that doesn't require that much power. Now, if you were to step up or down to a couple other Hifiman headphones like a Susvara or an Aria that are a little bit harder to drive, you're definitely going to see advantages with a more powerful system like this. But with this particular headphone, you don't need something that crazy. Now, one of the upsides of this headphone is, again, that detail retrieval. And that's kind of the main reason why I would recommend this is a headphone that you really hear everything in the music with. And by everything, I mean everything. So when things aren't smooth, you definitely notice it. There are a couple downsides to this headphone though, and a couple upsides that's actually really good with. One, the bass response is fantastic for a Hifiman headphone. It's really, really good. Unfortunately, the mid-range response and the way that the treble represents itself is not perfect for this price range, and there are some suggestions I might have to get better performance here. Specifically, the Abyss Diana V2, and we'll be bringing up Abyss again later in this video. But the V2 has better mid-range response, being both warm and natural and technically impressive all at the same time. It's actually fairly good. And then the treble response is far more even and actually one of the better treble performing headphones I've come across, period, at any price point. And on top of all that, you're saving a little bit in cost. Now the V2 is built better, but there are things on the HE1000 that are superior, in my opinion, to the V2, being the bass response, the soundstation clarity, and if you're into it, the actual details are more on the HE1000 SE. And in my opinion, you won't get better details unless you go to the Diana Phi or the 1266. Now, personally, my recommendation is this. This headphone is sort of like a one-trick pony. It's got other aspects of it that are really good, like every $3,500 headphone should, but really its main showcase is detail performance and its ability to really extract everything out of the music. Now, I think the V2 is probably a better headphone. I like more areas of the sound reproduction of it than I do on this, though it doesn't have the standout feature that this has. Now, if this were my pick personally, I would pick the V2, and it's even coming in a little bit cheaper than this at $3,000 versus $3,500. So you save a little bit of cost there if you want my personal recommendation, though the performance here is excellent. Okay, so it's being driven off of the X26 DAC and the H20 amplifier. Unfortunately, they are mismatched in color. He did pick these up used, but I'm going to be talking about the new prices for each of these. This DAC features dual ESS 9038 Pro chips. These are not the latest and greatest Sabre chips, but the performance here in terms of specs and in terms of measurements is really, really good. And some people might even prefer this over some AKM chips that are around about the same price range, just depending on what type of sound signature you like. Now, with this system, I actually find this to be analytical. I don't find it to be a particularly smooth system. I don't find it to be a particularly lush system. It's very kind of cut and dry for me, almost to the point of being a little bit boring. And I think the main problem here is actually the DAC, because if I go to a different DAC, being like a topping D70S, for example, I get much warmer performance, and I feel like the life of the music kind of comes through a little bit more. So while I find this DAC to be very technically impressive and the measurement performance is undeniable, my listening impressions are a little bit less satisfied than I think the price point would suggest. So this is actually another area where I think you could save a little bit of money. Now I will have some recommendations for that in just a second, but now I want to talk about the amplifier and how this system all pairs together and what the synergy is like. So the amplifier, unfortunately, it's not as technically spec-wise and measurement-wise as impressive as the DAC is for its price range. In fact, you can get almost identical performance to this H20 for about $300 to $400. Like the THX 789 is very comparable to this thing, but this does offer one serious advantage over those, in my opinion, which is going to be your input flexibility and your output flexibility, this providing more input options and more output options than those. Do I find this to be worth 3 times the cost for equal performance in almost every other category? No. And in fact, in Gustard's own lineup, you can actually get something with comparable performance that's a little bit smaller and actually has some more beneficial features, in my opinion, than the inputs and outputs, being remote control. And that's going to be the H16, which is just a dedicated headphone amplifier coming in at $400 and more directly competing with some of the SMSLs and the THXs of the world. Okay, now the synergy of the system is a little bit off for me. Now, again, this is why I want to clarify that this system is made to drive a large collection of headphones, not this specific headphone, but we just have that here to talk about today. But this combination just really doesn't do it for me. I need something a little bit smoother to tame down some of the highs and actually to make that detail retrieval a little bit more enjoyable on the HE1000 SE, whereas this just kind of puts that on steroids. And for the right headphones that are a little bit slower, maybe headphones that need a little bit more of a detailed kind of a push from the amplifier and the DAC coming through, this is going to be exceptional. This is going to be great. Something like the Odyssey lineup, if you have a nicer Odyssey headphone, I would absolutely recommend a system like this. But with the double sharpness, it just kind of comes across a little bit dry, a little bit sterile for me, and I would prefer something a little bit smoother. So let's talk about how you can get something a little bit smoother and some other recommendations I have to save a little bit of cost here and some other systems that I think you could build for the same amount of money. Okay, for the amp, going back and forth between these two on this specific headphone, I noticed no difference whatsoever. And from the measurement side, they're actually fairly similar. And I really actually like this H16. In fact, I've been using it personally since I got it. There are a few reasons why I like this a lot. One is the remote support. That's a big benefit over something like a THX. And it also has the power supply inbuilt into the system, so you can just use a typical 3-pin cable that you would plug into like a standard computer, for example. So the entire constructions and the specs, and more importantly, the sound, are right up my alley. Now, on most headphones, this is actually a slightly less analytical version of the THX. Still really fast, still really detailed, but it doesn't feel overly sharpened like the THX does. And I actually think that this hits a little bit harder in the bass response than a lot of the THX headphones do. It's a little bit more solid. This shares a similar characteristic, but the DAC here is really what's kind of making this headphone seem a little bit too shiny for me personally. So right here, just by switching to a lower end Gustard, you get similar performance, slightly less features, and even some more features for $600 cheaper, coming at $400 for just the amplifier. Okay, for DACs, there are a few options here, and this is where I would mainly consider saving a little bit of cost here. There are some other Gustard DACs that are very, very good. You do have the X22, which measures very well and is a couple $100 cheaper than the X26 is. There's also a couple other Gustard options. I'll actually leave links to the Oppo store where you can check out some of those other options. Now, the Gustard A22, which is going to be slightly cheaper than this, is going to feature AKM DACs as opposed to the ESS DACs that are in here. So you're going to be getting a slightly different sound performance, and you may have a preference on which one you like. I think it'd probably be worth saving the extra cost, but I actually have a drastically cheaper option that's of a different brand that I think offers better flexibility in terms of input options, as well as, in my opinion, just sounds straight a little bit better. And that's going to be the topping DX70S. Now, this topping has almost no issues sonically. This is a near perfect DAC as far as today's standards go. It's very, very good, but it has one major benefit over the X26, in my opinion, which is Bluetooth capability. It's also a little bit smaller, and for certain desks, size is going to be Not everybody can have a system this large. And this is going to help save a little bit of space being a medium size for a DAC. Now this also features remote support and of course a myriad of kind of typical digital inputs like optical, USB, coaxial, AES, of course, as well as the Bluetooth and IIS, which is something that this also has. Now the D70S is actually coming in at about $600 cheaper than the X26. Now again, we're going to see a slight difference in DAC chips, this being an AKM 4497, a dual one of course, and that one being of course the ESS. But I think that topping has really nailed what I consider a very complete, neutral, almost uninfluenced sound quality with their DAC, and it doesn't seem to have any specific feature that I can hear that I would consider to be a negative trait. Unlike this one seems a little bit analytical. Sometimes you can use that to your benefit, but not in this particular case. So I'm going to recommend something a little bit cheaper and a little bit smoother. I think the potential savings here, if you want to go for slightly cheaper equipment, is huge. And with the system I built with the D70S and the H16, you're actually going to be saving about $1,200 on top of your $6,000 purchase. So that's actually pretty big, and you could buy a really nice either single headphone or set of headphones even for that extra $1,200 if you wanted to. And you'll save an additional $500 off that if you got the Diana V2. Okay, here's something else that you could build for this system that I actually think would beat the purpose of the system as it's laid out right now, which is going to be kind of maximum details, maximum information. That's what the system is seemingly good at. So let's beat it for the same cost. So this is where that second Abyss headphone that I was talking about, which is going to be the AB1266 Phi TC. Now this version comes in two versions. One is a $5,000 version with a single-ended cable, which you can go to Perry Up to get a balanced cable for about 50 to 60 bucks. But the other version comes with a bag and a very nice cable and can cost you about $6,000. So we're gonna obviously be getting the $5,000 version because the headphones between the two versions are exactly the same. They sound the same specs, same headphones. Now I've been personally using that D70S with that H16 and I can vouch for that, but we're gonna be trying to keep this at $6,000. So instead of the H16, I'm gonna go with the THX 789. That's gonna be giving a little bit more of an analytical, sharper feel to the sound signature versus the H16. And I'm also gonna be sticking with that D70S. So total investment for the amplification and the DAC is $1,000. This is gonna be $5,000, totaling $6,000. What are the benefits and what are the drawbacks of the system? Some of the drawbacks are versatility. So this headphone right here, if I want to take this off this system and I have it at my desk and I want to go somewhere or listen in the front room or listen on my bed or just walk around the house and play it off my phone, you can. You don't have that flexibility with this, and you're going to need to invest in additional equipment to go to different places if you really want to do that. And for some people, that flexibility is massive, and that's one of the main benefits of actually getting this headphone at this price point. Almost no other planars at this price can really do that without additional amplification needed. Now, I do think some people might prefer the tuning of the HE1000 SE, and I think the main thing that they might like is the very confident bass response. And this is a very fast, very solid, very clear, very detailed bass response coming out of here. Now, you can get that with this if you tilt the pads open a little bit. You can actually get better bass than that, but not everybody was going to want to listen to these headphones like that. And you of course still have the rest of the tuning, which I actually consider to be a very, very clinical, very fast, kind of very just specific. This is an incredibly specific headphone. The differences in detail presentation here though is quite immense. This headphone, you feel like you're listening to a track. You always feel like you're kind of understanding the framework of the song, and it's almost to a distracting level, and you're always realizing it. This almost transcends that even further and provides not just the framework, but you also get kind of what the music was intended to do. So if you get something that's large scale, it seems powerful, it seems large scale, you get immensely specific placement and staging for things in a way that the HE1000 SE can't quite do. The HE1000 SE's detail is also primarily found in the treble response. It's definitely got details in the other regions, but it's primarily found in the treble. So you're going to be getting a lot of treble forwardness, and that's something that the 1266 doesn't have issues with. It doesn't have spikiness in the treble response. It doesn't have weird dynamic issues in the treble response. And one more standout feature as to why this sounds so much more kind of specific with detail, even amongst very specifically detailed headphones like the 1000 SE, is the timbre capability. Now the 1000 SE suffers from what I call sort of a timbre blend, where things always sound a little metallic, even when they shouldn't be. You could be listening to something that doesn't have anything to do with metal at all, and it'll get a little bit of a metallic twang with it. And I think that just comes down to either the materials that they use to build the headphones or the substrate material, whatever it is, it's got this little blend here. Very different on the 1266. No timbre blend. In fact, this has some of the most naturalistic but specific timbre of any headphone ever. Now, I think if I were to personally recommend this system, I think that this technically does beat it at $6,000 for the majority of what you'd be looking for in terms of treble response, but it does have some drawbacks. One, it is built better, but it's less comfortable. Like, this thing is built like a tank in the way that no other headphone on the market is, but it's not all that comfortable all the time. But on the flip side of this, I think that the amp and DAC that I suggested are kind of the bare minimum that I would get with this system. This is definitely a revealing headphone, and you can get better sound from this thing and more specific sound by going with different equipment, though most of that equipment is going to cost a little bit more to a lot more depending on what you go with. So while this DAC and amp are totally maxing out this headphone's potential in terms of volume and demanding requirements of its wattage and its voltage, I think you're kind of just getting to the bare minimum of what I would suggest for the 1266 if you go with the 789 and the G70S. Okay, that's going to be it. One, I want to send a huge thank you to Israel for letting me borrow his equipment. I definitely enjoyed listening to this. Obviously, the system sounds fantastic. There are some things that when I look at it more objectively, if we're just limiting it to this system, that I would suggest to other people. And, you know, I talk to him about those suggestions all the time, so he's well aware of that. And like I said, he has a myriad of other Dacs amps and other headphones that he runs in conjunction with this. So don't think that this is, you know, the entire system, so I'm not tearing down his whole audio world here. Trust me, he's got a lot. Okay, so this is going to be the $6,000 build. Again, with this whole series, this is a system that is merely a suggestion of what you could do. Some areas where you could save a little bit of cost, some areas where I might recommend some other things. And then this is not designed to be the absolute best sound for the money, just an option. Okay guys, thanks very much for catching this episode. Until the next time, my name is Josh, signing off.